canons are a living tradition. So, the canons, the reason that I wanted to talk about them is because this sets the stage for the fact that the canons still matter today. Some people would say, well, these rules were written 500 AD, 1000 AD, 800 AD. What relevance do they have to me now? Well, the thing is that the canons themselves reflect the teaching of the church. So even some of them that applied only to ancient times. For instance, there's a canon that if you can't bring an animal in the church. We all know, like especially people from folk Orthodox cultures, people that were raised Orthodox, know you can't take a dog into a church. Everybody knows that. You would not ever let a dog go in the church. However, cats can go in the church. Well, why can a cat go in a church but a dog can't? Well, because cats serve a very good function. They eat mice. But there's a canon that says, in a time of war, you can bring your cattle into the church to keep it safe, right? Because the church understands that people, there were situations that required extenuating circumstances that the good of the church understood that the good of the community, of people not starving to death, mattered. And in other words, but that truth, what we understood from that, yes, most of us don't have cattle now. And we wouldn't, if there was an invading army, our first thought would not be, let me take my cows down to the local Orthodox Church. So, would we say that that canon is outdated? No, we wouldn't say that canon is outdated. We would try to understand what the spiritual underpinning of that canon was and how it applies now. Because whereas certain aspects of the canons may be dependent on time, they have... That's my turn. They have a deeper underlying spiritual application, a spiritual understanding, underpinning. So whenever we see canons that are difficult to understand, we have to try to understand the context, because that matters. And the canons are always relevant today. Now some canons are not time dependent. They very clearly and very bluntly teach something that obviously would apply to today. But I just wanted to try to cover the idea of some of the canons being outdated or outmoded before we continue on with the discussion, just so we have a baseline there. In fact, the canons themselves speak about how they cannot be despised. The canons themselves speak about how they lost my place. Okay. Canon 1, for instance, of the Seventh Ecumenical Council. I'll read it. It's a little long, but it's important. For those who have received the priestly dignity, the inscribed canons and enactments serve as testimonies and directions, which we gladly receiving sing together with the divinely inspired David unto the Lord, saying, In the way of thy testimonies have I found delight as much as in all riches. Likewise, thou hast ordained as thy testimonies righteousness forever. Give me understanding, and I shall live. And if the prophetic voice commands us to preserve the testimonies of God forever and to live in them, then it is manifest that they abide indestructible and unshakable. For Moses the God-seer also speaks thus, It is not fitting to add to them, nor is it fitting to take away from them. And the divine apostle Paul, boasting in them, cries, Which things the angels desire to look into. Likewise the apostle Paul also says, But though we, or an angel from heaven, preach any other gospel unto you, than that which we have preached unto you, let him be accursed. Insomuch as this is true, and attested unto us, rejoicing over this, as one that has found great spoil, we receive the divine canons with delight, and we maintain wholly and unshakably the enactment of these canons set forth by the all-praised apostles, the holy trumpets of the Spirit, and by the 6 holy ecumenical synods, i.e. the 6 before this one, and those assembled locally to ensure such commandments, and by our holy fathers. For they all, being enlightened by one and the same Spirit, ordained what is beneficial. And whomever they gave over to anathema, those we also anathematize, and whomsoever to expulsion, those we also expel, and whomever to excommunication, those we also excommunicate, and whomever they subject to penances, those we likewise subject. So clearly the point of that canon, that text, that paragraph, is that the canons are not things that change over time, but it's one Spirit inspired all of the fathers in every generation with the same truth, which is Jesus Christ and his faith. With that in mind, we've now established that there is one faith that is passed down, one teaching from the apostles to today, and that the canons, the guiding principles of the church, have remained together and intact from all time, and that they're not added to. In other words, when they enacted these canons, even though they were enacting canons, they were saying we're not adding to the canons. So how can they be not adding to the canons if they're adding canons? Well, because they're not adding anything new. They're only restating what has always been taught. They're confirming because someone has challenged it. So in our time, Orthodoxy, we know, on the verge of the 1900 was a turning point for Orthodoxy in the world. Russia had reached a point when it was about to have a massive revolution where communists would come and they would wreck the church and destroy and murder 95% of all the clergy and nuns, monks, and destroy, I think, about 10,000 churches or more destroyed. And in Greece, the opposite was happening. Greece had emerged from the 400-year occupation of the Turks. It was free, at last, from the Turkish domination and was entering the modern age. But it was about to suffer its worst crisis yet, which was the defeat by Ataturk and the expulsion of the Greeks from Asia Minor. And this would be a massive difficulty because all of a sudden 1 million people would be sent to Greece and be refugees with no jobs, and Greece would be put into a very precarious situation. And also the Turks were waiting, were watching. So across the sea, so close from the islands that you could see from Chios, you can see Turkey in the cities. There's the Turkish army waiting. So Greece felt itself to be very weak, and as a result, it tried to make alliances with the Western powers, especially the British. So while Orthodoxy was at its, in some sense, at a very high position in Russia and about to fall, Orthodoxy in Greece and indeed the Greek nation, the two things being very related, were in a precarious situation, having emerged and grown from the time of the revolution, but at the same time being at any point afraid of the external forces that could destroy it, just as it knocked out 1 million people from Pontus and Cappadocia and Smyrna, people that had lived, Greek people who had lived there for 3,000 years were expelled in one fell swoop. So in this time of uncertainty, there arose the Prime Minister Venizelos, the very modernizing and we would say liberal politically Prime Minister. And he was opposed by the royalists. And this created a division in the Greek society, which even today we can see remnants of. For instance, if you go to Detroit, there are some places where there are 2 Orthodox churches, 2 Greek churches across the street from each other. And you say, why are there 2 Greek churches across the street? Well, it's because back in the 1910s, one of those churches was royalist and one of them was from Venizelos. So the political divisions were even going over to the church because the politicians weren't happy to just let the church do its own thing. They had to interfere because in Greece, with the religion and society being so intertwined, the politicians wanted to control the church and wanted the church to give backing to what they were doing. So, in these efforts to reach out to the Western powers, the Prime Minister Venizelos wrote many letters, and we have them. These are not matters of private opinion or people talking about something they heard from their grandmother. But no, we have these letters. Venizelos was finding people who would share his vision of modernizing Greek society, and one of the things he wanted to do was to modernize the church. So he found a willing partner in the bishop Meletios Metaxakis, who in his life, in various times, was archbishop in Athens, was patriarch in Constantinople, patriarch in Alexandria. And in the end of his life was trying to campaign to become Patriarch of Jerusalem, which, going back to the canons, bishops cannot be translated from one place to another like this. This is totally against the canons. And we would ask ourselves why this man was able to do this and what he was doing, but that would be outside of the scope of today's conversation because we only have so much time to talk. So Meletios and Venizelos work together to try to modernize things. And in Constantinople, in the Patriarchate, when the Patriarch died in 1920, there was a locum tenency. There was a vacancy, and so the metropolitan that was sitting in the place of the Patriarch at that time convened some of the bishops, and they wrote an encyclical in 1920 to the churches of Christ wherever they may be. And in this letter, they proposed things such as changing the calendar, because Greece was still on the Old Calendar, so Christmas was on January 7th, and everything was very traditional. They proposed cutting the liturgies down, taking some of the repetitive parts out. They proposed that the priests should no longer wear rassos in public, that they should wear the business suit that Anglican clergy wear, and that they should send theological students from Greece to England and vice versa, that there should be an exchange of theological students, so that the Anglican and the Greek Orthodox Church could become close. And Meletios even recognized that Anglican priests were true priests. This was a decision that was not shared by other Orthodox churches, but nevertheless it's on the record that he believed this and preached this and pushed this through, this recognition. The encyclical itself was problematic because it was addressed to the churches of Christ wherever they may be. The Orthodox Church, we say in the Creed, in the Pistevo, I believe in one holy, Catholic, and Apostolic Church. One. It's not many churches. We believe in one church. The Orthodox Church has always believed that it is the one church, and that all the other churches have broken off from the Orthodox Church at some point. The Roman Catholics broke off in 1054 to 1204. It was a process, but in that time frame. The Lutherans broke off from them. There were people that broke off from the Orthodox Church. The Assyrian people broke off in the 4th century, and then the Coptic people broke off. So there's always been times in the church where people broke off. Until very recently, the Orthodox Church described people that had broken off from it as being in heresy because they taught the wrong thing. What does the word heresy mean? Is it a label that we throw at people to be mean? You're a heretic. You're a bad person. I don't like you, you heretic. No. No, it's not. It's a neutral term. It means someone that makes a choice. Someone that makes a choice to follow his own will and not God's will in his church. So when we label something as heretical or someone as a heretic, we're not insulting them. We are describing an objective fact. Now, in polite company, we might not go up to our Roman Catholic or Protestant friend and say, hey, heretic, because then they might take it as a slur. We have to be polite. But in discussing these matters, especially on the highest level, when we're writing, if the church hierarchs are writing official statements, they have to maintain the fact that there is only one church, and that even if there are good people in other churches, that's not the point. That's God's business to judge other people and their salvation. But what we know is that the Orthodox Church is a church of Christ, and that all peoples, if they want unity of the churches, come back to Orthodoxy because it's the original thing.